You already know how this ends. You have been in this argument before. You present the facts, they ignore the facts. You stay calm, they get louder. You make your point clearly, they change the subject. And at the end, after all of it, nothing has changed. Except you. You are more drained, more frustrated, more confused about why you keep doing this. Schopenhauer watched this happen to intelligent people his entire life, and he came to a conclusion that most people take decades to reach, if they reach it at all. The argument was never yours to win, because it was never actually an argument. What it was, what it always is, and what Schopenhauer understood better than anyone who ever lived, is something far more interesting than a disagreement. Subscribe. We go this deep every week.
Before we go further, let's be precise about what we mean when we say stupid people. Because this is not about intelligence scores, not about education levels, not about any fixed category of person. Schopenhauer was talking about a specific mode of thinking. The mode where a person is not actually processing what you say, they are waiting for you to finish so they can say the thing they already decided to say before you started. The mode where evidence is not information, it is a threat to be neutralized. The mode where the goal of the conversation is not to arrive somewhere together, but to win, to dominate, to leave the room feeling more right than when they entered it. This mode is not rare. It is the default setting for most people in most disagreements. And the intelligent person who does not understand this will spend their entire life confused about why their clarity is not changing anything. It is not changing anything because clarity was never the problem, and it was never the solution either.
Schopenhauer spent years studying arguments, not the content of arguments, the mechanics. He wrote an entire book on it, The Art of Being Right, in which he cataloged 38 rhetorical tricks that people use to win arguments they have already lost on merit. And his conclusion was devastating. Most people in most arguments are not searching for truth. They are performing certainty. The argument is not a conversation. It is a theater. And the audience is not you. It is their own ego, watching to see whether they can maintain the story they have told themselves about who they are. Think about the last argument you had with someone unreasonable. At what point did they say, "You know what? You are right"?
Here is the part that nobody tells the intelligent person. Your intelligence does not help you in an argument with a stupid person. It makes things worse. Because your intelligence makes you a better arguer. You find the cleaner logic, the stronger evidence, the more precise language. And all of that precision, all of that clarity, lands on the other person as a more sophisticated attack that requires a more defensive response. The better your argument, the more threatened they feel. The more threatened they feel, the more aggressively they defend. The more aggressively they defend, the further from resolution you become. Your intelligence is accelerating the problem, not solving it. Schopenhauer called this the paradox of the superior argument. The person who is most right often loses most completely, because being right in a war of ego is the same as bringing a chess set to a knife fight. You are playing the wrong game with the wrong weapons against an opponent who does not know they are in a game at all.
200 years after Schopenhauer, modern psychology confirmed what he observed. Researchers discovered something they called the backfire effect. When people with strongly held beliefs are presented with clear, direct, factual evidence that their belief is wrong, they do not update. They dig in. They hold the original belief more strongly than before. Let that land for a moment. Your evidence, your careful, accurate, well-sourced evidence, is making them more wrong, not less. Why? Because the evidence is not being processed as information. It is being processed as a social threat. And the brain that receives a social threat does not reason. It protects. And protecting means doubling down on the position that is being attacked. You are not in a debate. You are in a territorial dispute. And territorial disputes are not won with evidence. They are won by the side that stops caring about winning, which is exactly what the stupid person will never do and what you should have done 10 minutes ago.
There is a cost to arguing with unreasonable people that most people never calculate. Not the time cost, not the emotional cost, the cognitive cost. When you argue with a stupid person, you are forced to build a detailed internal model of how their thinking works, to predict their next move, to find the angle that might get through, to speak their language well enough to be heard. And the more time you spend inside that model, the more your own thinking starts to mirror it. You start reacting instead of reasoning. You start defending instead of building. You start measuring your worth by whether you won the last exchange, which is exactly the metric that was destroying them before you adopted it. Schopenhauer called this being dragged into the mud, and he meant it literally. The ring is the trap, not the opponent. By the time you realize you have been fighting in the wrong arena, you have already left some of yourself there.
So, what actually works? If arguing does not work, if evidence makes things worse, if your intelligence accelerates the problem, what does a person do? Schopenhauer had 3 answers. The first, silence. Not the silence of having nothing to say, the silence of having everything to say and choosing not to. There is a specific kind of power that lives in the person who could destroy an argument and simply does not, who sits in the wreckage of someone else's certainty and says nothing, who lets the silence make the point that no words could make more clearly. The stupid person experiences this silence as agreement, which suits you perfectly, because you are not there to be understood. You are there to protect your energy for something that actually deserves it.
The second thing that works: questions. Not rhetorical questions designed to expose them. Genuine questions that invite them to examine their own thinking. That is interesting. How did you arrive at that conclusion? What would change your mind about this? Have you considered what happens if that assumption is wrong? Questions do not trigger the ego protection system the way statements do. They invite reflection instead of defense. And occasionally, rarely, but genuinely occasionally, the person you are talking to will actually reflect and find the gap themselves, which is the only way lasting change has ever happened in any mind. The third thing that works: strategic distance. The deliberate, conscious, unapologetic decision to stop spending your intelligence on minds that cannot receive it. Not with contempt, not with a dramatic exit, not with a final devastating comment that you have been rehearsing for 3 days. Simply, quietly, permanently, redirect your attention to the work, the actual work, that you have been neglecting every time you chose the argument instead.
Now, I want to say something that is harder than everything else in this video. The reason you keep arguing with people who cannot be argued with
is not because you believe you can change them. Deep down, you know you cannot. The reason you keep going back is because some part of you needs to be right out loud, needs to be recognized, needs the validation that comes from having the other person finally, publicly admit that you were correct all along. And that need, that very specific, very understandable, very human need, is the thing that the stupid person is exploiting. Not intentionally, but completely. Schopenhauer was precise about this. He said the intelligent person's greatest vulnerability is not their logic. It is their ego. The need to be understood. The need to be seen as right. The need that keeps dragging them back into rooms that will never give them what they are actually looking for. The day you stop needing the stupid person to admit.
Here is the thing Schopenhauer's life proved, more completely than any argument he ever made. He lost every short-term argument. He lost to Hegel in the lecture halls. He lost to the academic establishment that dismissed him for decades. He lost to the critics. He lost to the cultural consensus. He lost to every room that had already decided what was worth listening to. He lost everything in the short term. And then he won the century. His work influenced Nietzsche, Freud, Einstein, Tolstoy, the entire shape of modern thought. Hegel, the man who defeated him publicly, is now mostly a name in academic footnotes. Schopenhauer is read by everyone. Because Schopenhauer understood something that the people who defeated him never did. The audience for truth is not the room you are standing in. The audience for truth is history. And history does not care about who was loudest in any given conversation.
Why you should not argue with stupid people. Not because you cannot win, but because winning costs more than losing. Because every hour in that argument is an hour not in the work. Because your intelligence deployed there makes things worse, not better. Because the backfire effect means your evidence is sharpening their wrongness. Because the cognitive contamination is real and it leaves marks. Because the need driving you back, the need to be recognized as right, is the trap, not the solution. And because the audience that actually matters, the one that will still be listening long after this argument is forgotten, is not in that room. It is in the work you produce when you finally stop wasting yourself on the wrong conversation. Schopenhauer did not convince his contemporaries. He outlasted them. He outbuilt them. He outthought them in the privacy of his study, with no audience, with no applause, with nothing but the work and the time. That is the only argument